Okay, alrighty. Hope you guys can hear me. We're going to finish out what I hope is verses 18 and 19 today. I'm going to offer my usual threat and say that this shouldn't take that long. I only wanted to do these two verses because, as you can see, verse 20 and down kind of begin a new section that starts a very different train of thought, and I'm trying to cut this in half as much as I can. I really didn't want to start 20 and down until we had more time to devote to it. So we will just kind of look at the conclusions drawn by really this whole paragraph, all the way up from verse 5 and down, and see precisely what it is that the author is honing in on when he really concludes his entire train of thought in verses 18 and 19. So last week, we looked at a few different points, and one of the most specific ones is that the law in and of itself is a broken system. It was never designed to bring salvation, or perfection is the word that we're going to look at specifically today. Perfection is impossible via law. And he makes the point effectively that not only is it preferable, but it's necessary that you have an indestructible eternal priest. And I looked pretty deep into this, and I tried to scour to the best of my ability every resource that I knew how I could get my hands on. And it's interesting because the question really boils down to, why does this matter to the author? Because he is not interested. He doesn't care about the morality. He doesn't care about Jesus' perfection. I'm just specifically talking about context here. I know we can make all kinds of systematic theological statements about why Jesus is the perfect priest systematically, but contextually, in chapter 7, he's chiefly only interested in the fact that Jesus is the most qualified high priest because he lives forever. That's his only argument. That's his only purpose. It's his only statement, the only reason he gives for why Jesus makes a perfect priest. He's not even interested in the morality of it, unless you want to make an argument that's deeply implied already, that the author just goes ahead and assumes that you understand every man has fallen and thus Christ is the only optional high priest anyway, that he's just making a massive assumption into what you already know, which could be the case. He is dealing with a very specific audience here. But as far as we're concerned, that's really his only qualification that he gives in these verses, is that Jesus lives forever and other priests don't. And no one really knows why that's a matter, why that is the hill upon which this author dies. Why it wasn't morality, why it wasn't his godhood, his divinity, why here it is important to him that Jesus live forever. That's what makes him the ultimate high priest. Thomas Schreiner has some good thoughts on this. He doesn't quite answer the subject, but he does have a good point that he makes. He says, Hebrews maintains that Jesus is the true human being, the true Adam. He's greater than Moses as a faithful son and greater than Joshua because he grants eschatological rest. He's the fulfillment of the promises made to David and therefore rules now as the messianic king. Hebrews emphasizes as well, however, that Jesus rules as a priest king. As a priest king, Jesus accomplishes salvation and procures full forgiveness of sins for his people. In Hebrews 5:5, the author seizes upon the word forever. Okay, here we go. We're starting on this eternal priesthood of Christ from Psalm 110:4 to contrast the Melchizedekian priesthood with the Levitical one. Jesus qualifies as a Melchizedekian priest by virtue of his resurrection. So here Schreiner effectively makes the point. He says, what makes Jesus a Melchizedekian priest is his living forever, and that's the key. His life is indestructible. He has no end of life. Levitical priests could not retain their priestly office because they are mortal and die, but Jesus is a permanent priest because he continues forever. The superiority of Jesus' priesthood is evident, for Jesus is the only priest who conquered death, and doubtless a living priesthood has preeminence over one that presides over death. So, he doesn't go into great detail here, but his basic argument is because Jesus is deathless, he is the only one who has authority over sin and death, which is something, in other words, there was no human priest, even Melchizedek would be included in this, who had real authority over sin and death, right? None of them could actually say not only had they experienced sin and death, but they were free of sin and death. Jesus is the only one who can say, I've experienced temptation and also death, and still am deathless and sinless. No other priest could make that statement. So based on that, the author might be making his statement. In other words, death, we can play this out logically. Death, by its very definition, is the product of sin, right? The reason that death affects human beings at all, the reason Levites die at all, is because they are sinners, right? Sin and death, by its very nature, is I don't want to say unnatural, but it is the sinful state of humanity, right? If death exists, sin by proxy is the germinating seed that creates death. Death is the product of sin. So for a priest to live forever is also another way of saying he is sinless, but also the fact that he has beaten the consequences of sin also. Something no other priest could do, right? Not only is he sinless, he's genuinely deathless also. He has no consequences of sin associated with him as well. Now, we could make a lot into this argument. We could look into a lot of the details of how we can parse this, why the author is so interested in the eternality of the Son and the indestructible nature of the Son as the reason for his priesthood. But I do want to get to these verses, and then we'll see if we got some time at the end, if I am as short as I say, and we'll look at it. Some of the other theories that are kind of floating around as to why the author's that worried about this particular aspect of the high priesthood. So I'm going to treat these as one block. This is 18 and 19. I'm going to treat these, they're all one sentence, as you can probably read in most of your modern study Bibles or any study Bible you may have. And we'll look at this and see what we're looking at. We have our very first noun up here at the front. So the noun, excuse me, I'm throwing things everywhere. Authatesis. Authatesis. This abolition or cancellation. Make this as close to the right side as I can. Something along those lines. Authatesis. Abolition. We'll use abolition for now. Because, or for in reason of men is like because of. So because we have our post positive right here, our for, or because in English we would technically reverse the order. The for would be in the front. But in Woodley this will be translated like in for. But in English, we would say cancellation for in genetai. So this is the verb to be or to become. Being pro aguses. This is pro. You probably might see the prefix right there. Pro. So this is something behind, something previous, something before, beforehand, something along those lines. Beforehand, antoles, command. Or commandment. It could even mean just teaching. Doesn't necessarily have to imply command. That's an important word. Hang on to that one. Then you have the finish of the sentence. Through the itself, asthenes, weak. Through itself, or through himself. In this case, it's a third person. Weak. Asthenes. Asthes is weak. Asthenes is the adjective. Weak and... Come down here. Anopheles. Worthless, useless, something along those lines. Udengar. So okay, here we go. We're breaking sentence. New phrase. For post positive. Uden, nothing or no one. It could mean no one also. Nothing or no one. Either one. Both of those are good translations. Eteletusen. This is past tense, so this is complete. But this is, since it's past tense, it would be like made complete. Something happened previously. But of course it's negated, right? No one made complete. Hanamos, the law. Namas is law. Antinomian is namas, right? Anti-namas. They do not believe in the law. Namas is law. Epesagoge. This is instead of or in place of post positive, but kratanos, stronger, greater, bigger. Elpidos, hope. Then you have this little phrase at the end, D, through ace, relative pronoun, which. Angizomen, this is come near or approach. But in this case, men, M-E-N on the end of the word there implies to us this is a plural first person. We come near. So let me smooth this out in English. We come near or approach to theo, right? Theos is God, the God, right? We have this interesting little happenstance in Greek where the Greek New Testament is the only place where the authors of Scripture designate which God they are talking about, because in Greek pagan culture, you could say God and you can mean all kinds of people. You can mean Apollos or Zeus, or you can mean Diana. You can mean any number of gods, but when every New Testament writer says the God, right, they use a definite article. They're talking of one specific God. But anyway, to that point, here we go. We got our little translation here. For in fact, cancellation, previous commandment, is itself weak and useless. For nothing was made complete by the law. Almost got a parenthetical here, right? No one is made complete. Nothing is made complete. However, instead, a greater hope through which we come near to the God. So, by far our key words. If we're going to isolate a couple keywords here and that are going to really drive our translation, one of them is definitely, what is he saying when he says the law is canceled or this commandment is canceled? That's a pretty hefty statement, right? To say that it is abolished, it is completely removed in some way. That's a significant statement that we need to understand rightly. And not only is that command abolished, but it is weak and useless. Uses two synonymous terms to describe the same thing, right? This is a weak law. It's a useless law. It's a pretty big statement. I'm going to play one of my cards early here. Entoles, command, is a significant word that we need to pay attention to. That's going to really determine our interpretation. And finally, complete, right? Ateleusin, to be made complete or to make complete, made complete previously. No one is made complete previously. What does it mean that the law cannot complete anything? And then, of course, we have pretty generic words, but very powerful words nonetheless. A greater hope through which we come near to God. So, let's break this down. We're going to look at this specifically word by word. I want to look at cancellation first. This little word right here. Athetesis. This word only appears here. It appears one other place in Hebrews. It only shows up in the book of Hebrews. And it is only found in the Greek New Testament twice in the book of Hebrews, and that's it. You'll find it nowhere else in the Greek New Testament. And for some reason, I thought I had written down the other Hebrews reference, and I apparently did not. So that's my fault. But if you want to know where it is, let me know. Email me, and I can send that over to you. But there is one more use in the book of Hebrews for cancellation or abolition. It's very woodenly translated to set something aside. So actually, if we were to break this down, in Greek, tethemi is to put or place something, okay? So long story short, putting the suffix on the end, to thetesis, is basically how the word breaks down to say you set something away. You move it away from yourself. And you can see it, some examples of it are in the LXX. It is used about a dozen times in the LXX. And here's a couple uses of it. Here's where David is hiding in the cave from Saul, and Saul goes into the cave and is relieving himself. And so David sneaks up behind him and cuts off a piece of his robe to prove that he could have killed Saul but did not. And he appeals to Saul later. He says, "See, my father, from the corner of your robe in my hand, for the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, you may know that there is no wrong or treason. There's your word. In my hands I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life. Take it." Treason. This is a word that's used kind of like that, to turn away, to move away, to set something aside. This was a word you could translate to like a traitor, like treasonous, someone who betrays in some way. This law is betrayed. It is completely destroyed. It is treason, if you will. It is being set aside. You can also see it in Psalm 132:11. The Lord swore to David a sure oath from which he will not turn back. one of your sons of your body I will set on your throne. To turn away, to move away or move back. So this word, as you can see, is typically used pretty negatively. Right? The author states the former commandment is set aside. It has been moved away. It is removed from the situation, which you say, wait, that sounds pretty antinomos, right? Antinomian, right? To say, well, the Old Testament has been, or the law has been set aside. It has been removed. It has been abolished. This word for like cancellation has been applied to it. That's a hefty term to use against this particular word. And I do want to clarify for that reason that what we're talking about, and this gets a little tricky when we deal with syntax, he is not abolishing the entire law. He is saying the beforehand commandment. Okay, this is key. Nomos means law. Okay, this word, when you see this word, especially in the book of Hebrews, almost in every case in the Greek New Testament, you see law singular. Right? It's just all one word, law. It's not laws. There's no plural ever attached to it. N-O-M-O-S, laws. That's the singular nominative case for this verb. He's talking about the law, the one and only singular law, the Mosaic law, the big block that is all the laws from Exodus to Deuteronomy is described simply as the law. This is not that word. This is entoles. Entoles is a specific commandment. It's a little more precise. It's talking about a command, a teaching, and it is also singular. We're talking about one specific command. The law is full of commands, right? It's not laws. It's a law book, a giant one singular law book that is full of multiple commands. And here he's specifying a specific command that is weak and worthless, okay? So my point is, when he's writing this off, he's saying this command is canceled. He's not canceling the entire law. He's not saying that the law is utterly useless in every way and that it has no other purpose whatsoever. He says there is a specific aspect of the law that is canceled. Now, you say, well, wait a minute, Alex, how does that work? How are we going to cancel one part and not the other? I thought that the law was one congruent section, and it is. But remember, in this particular chapter, we're dealing with a specific context. We're looking at a specific law. And that law is what we read in verses 15 and 16. And I thought I put it on the screen here, but I guess I didn't. But if you look back up at verses 16, or excuse me, really 16 down in 17, there's a specific law that he's talking about in verse 18. He becomes a priest not on the basis of legal requirement concerning bodily descent. That word requirement, that is entoles. And we did this last week. If you look back at last week, entoles is the word used in verse 16. And he uses it again in verse 18. He's talking about the legal requirement of the priesthood. Okay? He's not dealing with the entirety of the law. He is here. He's going to make a statement about the law, that no one was made complete with the law. That's an important statement. And that does bear to what's going on. But the specific command that he's dealing with in context is the command about the priesthood and its legal bodily descent requirement from Levi, right? You have to be descended from Levi. That's the command, or else you cannot be a priest. That command is itself weak and useless. Then, parenthetical, no one was made complete without the law, the whole law. The law, everything from Exodus to Deuteronomy. Okay, so we're making distinctions here. In this particular context, he's referring to an aspect of the law that he's not trying to separate. He's not saying one part's canceled and the other's not. He's saying this is the specific law that I am addressing that deals with priests in verse 16. And it's described again in verse 18, right here. Even inside of the fact that in verse 19, he starts this little parenthetical right there. Udingar eteleosen hanamas. So we'll get into that here in just a second. But I want to look at why is this command abolished or canceled or removed? Because it has two characteristics. It is weak and it is worthless, which is, you say, okay, even if we make that argument, Alex, and even if you want to go so far as to say, well, here he's treating one specific command differently than the entire law, he's still arguing pretty hard that it is weak and useless, which is a significant accusation to make if you're talking about the law of God himself, right? So let's look at these. I want to look at these words. The word for weak, this is no surprise. This is a pretty straightforward word in the Greek New Testament. It's used 24 times. It means exactly what you think it means. To be weak, to be small, to be incapable, to be unable in some way. And you can kind of see it there a little bit. Right there. There's your negation particle in the beginning of the word. Sthenes is like strength, power, muscle of some sort. And so this is lack of muscle. You're weak, right? You can see it used in a number of places. It's pretty straightforward for while we were still weak. Paul says in Romans 5:6, at the right time Christ died for the ungodly. Galatians 4:9. But now that you have come back to know, or you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak? This one's interesting. And worthless elementary principles of the world, whose slaves you want to be once more. This is the same wording right here. This is Paul describing the law, specifically the law of the Judaistic legalizers, right? That's the specific. He's not necessarily dealing with the law. He's dealing with the legalist, right? The one who says you cannot be saved unless you have been circumcised and obey the Mosaic covenant. Then Paul comes back and he uses the same exact words. You turn back again to that weak and worthless elementary principle. Same words. Mark 14:38, watch and pray that you not enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. So, how can you say this commandment's weak? In what way would we argue then that the priesthood is weak in some way? Well, the first one that obviously comes to mind, the most immediate statement, is that it dies, right? Priests die. They fall apart. Their bodies quite literally get weak and die over time. So this command that your priest can only come from the tribe of Levi innately is a weak law. It's indictment, which is a pretty serious idea of the fact that God himself set up a system designed to be weak and to rely on weak men, right? Men that sin, and as a result of their sinful natures, they're going to experience death. And that makes the law weak. It cannot guarantee it removes sin. It cannot guarantee it saves anybody, because for it to do that would be to guarantee that the priest can do his job well and perfectly and forever, and he can't. So it's a weak law. God wrote a deliberately weak commandment to people, not because the law in and of itself is intrinsically weak, because it was always the purpose to fill it with something stronger, right? To come back with something better that doesn't rely on weak and worthless men. So that's the first synonym. The second one's pretty similar. It's a little more, shall I say, detailed, right? Weak is a pretty broad word. You can say you have a weak arm. You can say you've got a weak constitution. You can say, I don't know, you have a weak resume. You can make weak about all kinds of things, but worthless is a little more specific. It is quite literally unprofitable, worthless in some way. It's only used here and in Titus 3:9. That's the only use of the word worthless or useless. And this is Titus 3:9, where you see that famous verse of avoid foolish controversies, genealogies, dissensions, and quarrels about the law, for they are worthless and unprofitable, right? This is the word right here, worthless, just for clarification. It's not this word. I don't know why I highlighted that word, but this is a different Greek word. But as you can see, synonymous, right? They're worthless. They have no intrinsic value whatsoever. To argue, if you can sit there and argue and discuss and fight about the law and worthless quarrels and dissensions all day long, and they're worthless. They yield. No one is edified or sanctified as a result. Moeller puts it this way. He has a great definition. The law is not unprofitable in regards to its utility. It still adequately performed its given responsibilities. Paul tells us we should be grateful for the law. He's talking about the whole Mosaic law, since it exposes great need for a Savior. Right? Romans 7:7, Paul explains he would not know he was a covetous person without the law. He makes a good point. I mean, we can go into a great deal of theology if we go over to look at Romans 5-7, where Paul, in great detail, makes the case that you needed the law to know what sin is. Sin was not clearly defined and determined until Moses. There was certainly sin in the world for 2,500 years prior. No one's arguing that. But that sin was not described and laid out. And nowhere could you find any code of laws that said lying is always wrong, murder is always wrong, adultery is always wrong. There was no indication of that anywhere pre-Moses. So it was significant that Moses came and defined sin. in very certain terms. It was always the goal to heavily define precisely what sin was via law. So it has a purpose. No one's saying it's unprofitable in regards to conviction. It's not unprofitable in regards to the knowledge of sin. But the law, therefore, is not unprofitable in the same way that it has no use at all, but in the sense that obeying it does not provide any ultimate eternal rewards. The law is used to condemn, but it can never be used to save. For effecting salvation, the law is unprofitable. So that's what we're looking at here. It can never be used to save. For effecting salvation, the law is unprofitable. The law can't save you. This makes a great deal of contextual sense with this verse. Because, remember, the author's here not even necessarily dealing in the morality of the issue yet. I mean, that's already very much implied, and we're going to look at that in later chapters. Right now, he's just dealing with the fact that it is useless, right? Morality aside, it is a worthless precept. It cannot save you, and it cannot sanctify you, and it cannot bring about. The priesthood is useless. The priesthood is worthless. So, you have a problem, right? You need to draw near to God. You need to have access to a holy God, and you're sinful, and you're surrounded by priests that are also sinful, right? What is your move? You are in deep trouble if you do not have a priest that can make your sins go away in some regard. And we see that starting in verse 19. So now I'm looking down at verse 19. And you'll note that in most study Bibles, it is almost included like a parenthetical, right? The law made nothing perfect, right? No one made complete the law, right here. There's your parenthetical. Now we are talking about the law, okay? We're talking about large scale, capital L, Moses through Exodus through Deuteronomy, the law. It cannot make complete anything. And that is precisely the word we're looking at. I know most of your translations will say perfect. And that's good. That's fine. That works. This word, there really isn't like a different word for perfect and complete in Greek. Their word for perfection is completion. That's kind of an amoral word. It doesn't really necessarily have to have a moral connotation either way. To be perfect is to be complete in the Greek language. If it's complete, it's perfect. If it's finished, it's perfect. If it is fully built, it is perfect. That's the idea. So he's not necessarily, he is dealing in morality. He's dealing with the fact that you can't be perfect because you can't be complete. And you can't be complete because the law can't make you complete. Right? The whole implication of glorification, right, is that one day you will be complete. You will be completely done. You will be finished as a work that God has made. You will be absolutely and totally perfect in every way, and at that time, you will be 100% completed, right? If there's a progress bar for your sanctification. So, it comes from the Greek word telos, right? If you ever heard of like the telos of something, even that's still kind of thrown around in English vernacular, to finish, to complete something. When you're perfect, you're finished, you're complete. But it's modified, right? No one is complete, which tells us an immediate logical principle. The law cannot inherently bring about human completion. It cannot. The law is incapable of sanctifying you completely. It cannot do it. This is something that even I know I've harped on this a couple times, so I'm going to harp on it one more time, and hopefully I'll be done. Even in Reformed circles, you see people that seek to bring about a reinstitution of the law in the public square. And typically, this comes out of a Reconstructionist view. So there's, in the eschatological world, there's post-mills, there's pre-mills, there's a-mills. The pre-mills are those that don't believe the 1,000 years has happened yet. We're pre-millennia right now. The post-millennia means that it has begun. We just haven't seen the end of it yet. We're in the process of the 1,000-year age. And in that camp, there's also a smaller camp called Reconstructionist post-mills. Reconstructionist post-mills will say, it is our job to go out there and institute the law. Right now, as Christians, we should preach the gospel, we should save souls, but in addition to those things, we should institute biblical laws, we should bring back the Mosaic law in its civil forms and in government forms, and we should institute those things in the public square right now. And then over time, slowly, the world's going to get better and better and better because we reform governments, we reform, entire organizations and cultures and redeem. You probably hear that term a lot, redeeming cultures, redeeming the governments, et cetera. And eventually, it's going to be paradise here, and then Christ's going to come back. That's kind of a Reconstructionist view. That entire thesis relies upon using the Mosaic law to perfect humanity, and it can't do it. It's specifically designed not to do it. Now, it can convict humanity 100%. The law is 100% designed to convict you. It is designed to tell you what sin is and how desperately in sin you are. That is the goal of the law, but that is its only goal, right? It can't sanctify you. It can't bring you access to God. It can't mediate for you. It can't perfect you. It certainly is not going to get you any closer to God. If anything, it's going to get you further from God. And this is past tense, right? It made complete. Nothing was made complete. He's relying on a track record here. He's saying past tense, right? The law did not make anything perfect, and it has a 1,500-year track record of not doing that, right? So if you have a Reconstructionist friend, you can tell them, well, the law has been around for 1,500 years where a bunch of people abided it, to the letter, and look where that got them. Didn't perfect a whole lot. So that's a serious concern. The law cannot perfect. It cannot make you complete. It cannot perfect you. It can't sanctify. It was never designed to do that. So what is designed to do that? The greater hope. And that is exactly what we're talking about here. Right? Law made nothing perfect, but in place of stronger hope. This is probably, I know this is very simplistic Greek wording. There's no great mystery of translation or interpretation here, but this is easily the most powerful section of this chapter. By a greater hope, you draw near to God. Now, this is a comparative verb. So to make clear what that means, kratos. If you ever see kratos in English or Greek, it means strength or strong. No, I'm butchering my Greek lettering here, but I'm sure you'll forgive me one day. Kratos is the simple noun. This is kratanos. This is greater, stronger. You're comparing something to something else. So kratos is strong. Kratanos is stronger, greater, more powerful in some way. And that comparative verb for greater or stronger is used 18 times, Greek New Testament. 12 of them are in Hebrews alone. I believe we actually looked at this in chapter 6. But here's just a few uses of it. This is Paul in 1 Corinthians 7. It is better to marry than to burn with passion. Right? If you can't exercise self-control, it is greater, it is stronger, and it is better that you marry. Philippians 1:23, I'm hard-pressed between the two. My desire is to part and be with Christ, for that is far better. Right? You're comparing something to something else. It's better to marry than to burn with passion. It's better to be with Christ than to stay here. It is better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than for doing evil. All right, Peter almost seemingly with a no-brainer here. If you're going to suffer, at least suffer for doing good. Right? It compares doing good and doing evil. So we're comparing something. We're comparing the hope. Right? It is attached specifically to this Greek word elpidos. Right here. Get a different pen. Elpidos. Everywhere, that is a very, very common word in the Greek New Testament. Everywhere you see the word hope, it is that very generic word. Hope. Now, but this is a greater hope. That tells us a few things. One, that tells us the law did give hope. No one's denying that. There was some hope in the law, in the old covenant, in the old priesthood. But here, this is a greater and better hope. Right? It is a significantly improved hope that we have in Christ now. One commentator puts it this way. F.F. Bruce has a commentary of Hebrews. Hopefully you can read this. It says, it was inevitable that the earlier law should be abrogated sooner or later. For all the impressive solemnity of the sacrificial ritual and sacerdotal ministry, no real peace of conscience was procured thereby, no immediate access to God. That is not to say that faithful men and women of Old Testament times did not enjoy peace of conscience and a sense of nearness to God. Now, he does make a good point here that we should stop and consider. What I would hate to do is to read this text, Hebrews 7:18 and or Hebrews 7, really the whole text, and say, well, the law is completely useless and worthless and it serves no purpose. No one can read the Psalter saying that with a straight face. Psalm 119, the biggest, I should say, a word count, the biggest psalm written of all the Psalms is Psalm 119, and it is David writing about how much he loves the law. Psalm 1, right? The law of the Lord is good. Perfecting, that's Psalm 6, excuse me. The law, the one who hears the law, Psalm 1, is like a strong tree planted by deep waters, right? The Psalms are full of David and righteous men praising the law and thankful for the law and showing genuine emotional desire and gladness for the law, right? It has a very significant holy purpose in the conviction of sin and the realization of the goodness of God and the imperfection of humanity. That is a good thing. And it brought about some level of peace of conscience and sense of nearness to God, right? There's no way you could write and say that the law was completely useless because David knew it, Solomon knew it, and they loved the law. And they experienced nearness to God and they experienced peace of conscience, right? The psalmist who cried, "Blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man to whom Yahweh imputes no iniquity," knew the blessedness of a peaceful conscience. And as Kaluk, who said, "It is good for me to be near God," Psalm 73, knew that access to the divine presence was always available to the man or woman of faith. But these experiences had nothing to do with that Levitical ritual or Aaronic priesthood. So the differentiation that we're making here is that the law served a purpose of conviction of sin, and good and righteous men loved the law of God, knowing full well it did not save and did not sanctify. Okay? It did not have the ability to accomplish those innately and directly. The whole apparatus of worship associated with that ritual and priesthood was calculated rather to keep people at a distance from God than to bring them near. This is significant. And we know this to be true. And anybody, if you've read Exodus up, you know this to be the case. This is something the Jews did understand very well. The Jews realized they had to be apart from God if they were sinful. That is a fact that Hebrews understand very well. You do not have permission to have access to God if you're a sinner, right? You see God will quite literally strike them dead if they touch Mount Sinai while he's there. Isaiah sees God in his throne room in Isaiah 6 and falls down in terror, right? Of all the things the Hebrews did understand correctly was that you can't have access to a holy God if you're a sinner. They got that. So the priesthood was designed to enforce that. But the hope set before us in the gospel is better because it accomplishes the very thing which was impossible under the old ceremonial. It enables Christians to draw near to God. How it enables them to do so is explained in greater detail later on, but the fact that the gospel, unlike the law, has opened up a way of free access to God is our author's ground for claiming that the gospel has achieved that perfection which the law could never bring about. Right? There's a sense in which he is making it clear the law cannot bring you near to God. It cannot. Jesus brings you near to God, which is precisely what we see in these final words. We draw near. This is the most incredible line of this section. The whole realization that old priests can't get you near to God. We could even go even further. The bottom line is you need to get near to God. Right? You need access to a holy God, to a righteous God, and to a good God. And there's no way on this planet that you can do that. You can't do that yourself because you're a sinner, and you will be destroyed if you enter the presence of a holy God with your sins. He will wipe you out. A priest can't fix that for you either. You could try. A priest might be able to do so. And you might even see where Exodus has appointed, or Leviticus, I should say, has appointed certain men for that end. But ultimately, those men are sinful and they die. And what are you going to do now? Right? You might be able to get another one. You might not. You might get one that's full-blooded Levite. You might not. You might reach a point, in 1,500 years of time where the Levites have slowly been erased in general. Or you might be able to find one and get really lucky, but you might not. You don't know. You are very much in the hands of men if you're going to have access to God. And so the fact that through this greater hope, you can actually get close to God right, is a revolutionary. That is the new thing the Hebrews have not experienced before. That is a new way of thinking. So, a couple notes really quickly. I'm kind of wrapping up here, but a few other translational notes that are helpful for understanding this chapter. And one is that when we're dealing with the law, I know I'm kind of sidetracking a little bit here, but it is important to realize the law in and of itself. And this is something you can also throw out too. And this is something almost of a Messianic Jewish mindset. The law never promises to save you anyway. There's no case where even David in Psalm 119, he does not say the law will save him. He loves the law. He adores the law of the Lord, and he desires earnestly that it be written on his heart. But no one anywhere, God or David or Isaiah, anywhere in the Old Testament says the law will save you if you obey it. If you do good and you do keep all the laws and you are faithful and you are good, you will be saved and entered into the presence of God. Nowhere does the law say that. Now, it does say, if you keep the laws, that your nation will be blessed. This is a specific covenant. Now, I'm not saying this generically. I'm saying the nation of Israel, I'm going to say it's, you can check by this. I believe it's Deuteronomy 34, 33, 34, somewhere in there, where there's a great list where God says, if you do keep these laws and you do all these things that I have given you, and you do maintain this covenant, your people will be blessed. You will never be conquered. You will be free. You will be wealthy. You will prosper in the land I'm going to give you. He offers all these very national, large tier blessings to the Israelites, right? If they keep the laws. Nowhere does he say you will be saved and enter his presence forever. But, of course, we know that the opposite is what happens. Instead, the curses are what fall on them. So, this is a better hope. This is a superior hope. So, one commentator puts it this way: this doctrine affords immense comfort to Christian pilgrims in this world, because Christ continues forever, excuse me, pardon me, as a high priest in heaven, does not change, gets whatever he asks for, and never diminishes in his love and sympathy for his brothers. Every providence for the Christian must be for their good. John Bunyan beautifully writes, he has been a savior nearly 6,000 years already, 2,000 before the law, 2,000 in the time of the law, and besides the many hundred years that he and his flesh above continue to make intercession for them that come unto God by him. The day is yet to come, yea, will never come, that he can be charged with any fault or neglect of the salvation of any of them that at any time have come unto God by him. Right? Ian McLeod understands that he is a genuinely sympathetic priest. He loves and cares for us, the people he is elected to be saved. He does not, that's never going to change at any point in time. And he's the perfect priest and the perfect sacrifice, right? He can get whatever he mediates on your behalf, whatever he intercedes for you will be granted by the Father every time, because he is perfect. He is the both perfect priest and the perfect sacrifice. So there is truly nothing to fear. And hopefully that is the most beautiful truth we can draw out of this. So I'm going to go ahead and close. 3 things we can take from this passage. To draw near to God is the sole hope of every human being. You need to draw near to God, right? You need to have access to God in some way, or your fate will be grim and destructive. Drawing near to God is impossible through the law. Right? The law can't get you close to God. It can convict you of sin. It can remind you how far you are from God. That's about the extent of what it can do. Drawing near to God is possible through Christ, who provides hope as the perfect priest. So I'm going to go ahead and close it there. I'm going to end the stream and we'll do a little bit of discussion time. But if any of you guys are watching, I hope you enjoyed. And